Betsy Nicholas, President of Potomac Riverkeeper Network, and I'm going to hand it over to our Vice President and General Counsel, David Flores.
Thank you, Betsy. Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. We have an interesting mix of different topics we want to get through with you all this hour, and joined here now by at least one Riverkeeper colleague. We should have another one incoming here momentarily. We want to go over to get started here with Mark, our Shenandoah Riverkeeper, news about what's happening in Virginia with the incoming administration, lots of changes in state government. And following that, we'll talk a little bit about legislative priorities. Along the way, I'll be managing our Q&A. So if you have questions, please submit them. We'll stop here and there throughout this hour to field your questions, maybe engage a little bit of dialogue among the panelists. And then from there, we'll continue on northwards to Maryland, where Betsy and will talk a little bit more about the lay of the land with legislative advocacy, particularly for our priority issues in that state. And then we'll round out the hour with a much anticipated update on the state of the massive sewage overflow, largely over this past weekend in DC, that our Potomac Riverkeeper, Dean Naujoks, and his team, Evan and others, have been responding to with water monitoring and various public advocacy. So with that, I will hand things over to Mark to talk about this new day in Virginia with politics and policymaking on water.
Cool. Thanks, David. Let me just see if I can't hear. Does that work? Yeah, there we go. So November last year, we had a statewide election for 3 offices. And the 3 folks that won: Governor Abigail Spanberger, Lieutenant Governor Ghazala Hashmi, and Jay Jones as the Attorney General. Not talking politics too much here, but just all 3 are Democrats. And it's interesting in these statewide in this statewide election, the 3 folks all set Virginia were Virginia first. We have the first female governor, and Ghazala Hashmi. She was the first, is the first Asian American and the first Muslim elected to statewide office. And then Jay Jones, he became Virginia's first African American Attorney General. And so 3 first in Virginia, which is just kind of interesting that it all happened just on right then and there. And so some of the key players in the new administration, we have David Bulova, the Secretary of Natural Resources. Can you guys see my whole screen there? Do you see that? Yeah, thank you. I apologize for that. David Bulova, he was delegate for the 11th District, a strong supporter of the environment. We've had lots of issues that we've worked with Secretary Bulova, and so now he is leading Secretary of the Department of Natural and Historic Resources. And then within the DNR, we have Mike Rolban, who is staying on as the Director of Environmental Quality. He was in the Young administration for all 4 years. It did a lot of work, increased the transparency of permitting, and a number of other things that have been helpful to just get a better understanding of where issues are and where the permits are, where they are in the whole process. And then if you go over to Department of Agriculture and Forestry, we have Katie Frazier. And Katie, she came from Agribusiness Council, a farming person, strong supporter of Virginia agriculture. And within there, you have Charles Green, who became the new VDAC's Commissioner, Virginia Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. He's been with VDAC since 2005. The last 2 or 3 years, he was the Deputy Commissioner. And so he essentially is just moving up from inside, which is good because he's quite familiar with a lot of the, the issues that we've raised with VDACs concerning substandard farming practices contributing to water pollution in the Shenandoah watershed. Also, just going back to Bulaba, his deputy is Adrian Catula, and Adrian was heavily involved as the director for the Virginia delegate for the Chesapeake Bay Commission, and so she too is a strong supporter of water here in the Commonwealth. And then, in addition to the statewide elections, there were also all 100 seats were up for election in the Virginia House of Delegates, and it was a very narrow house that existed prior to the elections. It was 51-49 in favor of the Democrats going into this election, and after the election, the breakout now is 64 blue, 36 red. And I still think it's interesting when you look at this map, and this map is broken down not by Virginia counties, but rather by Virginia districts. You really see it's almost a breakout of, yes, it's red and blue, but it's almost a breakout of rural and urban. And you see this corridor stretching all the way down from Northern Virginia down through Richmond and then over towards the Norfolk area. And within the Northern Virginia area, just outside of DC, you see all of these districts, how tightly packed they are. That's simply due to population. Each one of these districts represents approximately 86,000 Virginia citizens. And so, it's an interesting look when you are, seeing this of just, the concentration of where these districts are, falling out. And again, I just mentioned that, Blue picked up 13 seats in this last election. And so that's just a real quick 50,000 foot overview on the elections that took place in November and the new administration with Governor Spanberger. I also want to mention that Governor Spanberger in her inaugural address, and then Jay Jones also gave a speech last Thursday talking about how Virginia plans on rejoining RGGI, the Virginia Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, and to help try to lower energy bills for Virginia citizens and residents, and also to help communities with flood preparation. And so now I'm just going to let David take it from here, talking about some of the bills that are currently in the General Assembly.
Thank you, Mark. And I just want to note for folks, because I'm not seeing any on the back end, if you do have any questions, there should be at the bottom of the Zoom platform a little button that reads Q&A. So send them in. On this slide, and just for my time here, I want to just focus on PFAS. Coming into session this year in Virginia as part of our various campaign work across the Commonwealth, our focus has been on PFAS specifically, an area where we've seen sort of a lot of missed opportunities, if you will, over the past so many years, and a great need to really kind of break through the inertia on policymaking to address the many varied ways in which PFAS threaten the health of Virginians and their environment, and to do so in some particular priority areas, right, that are important to us as a water protection organization. So the wastewater sector principally being our focus. The good news is that with so much going on politically in terms of policy making, we've seen a number of sort of expected and then unexpected, though still welcomed, legislative policy proposals on PFAS this session already. So I just want to describe a few of them here. I'll pause if there are questions, then I'll answer at the end, and then maybe from there turn things over to Betsy. So at the top, we have a legislative proposal from Delegate Hillary Pugh Kent from Tidewater, Virginia District in HB 880. This is a really important and sophisticated proposal that focuses in on PFAS contamination in the wastewater sector, and specifically focuses in on what Virginia has not done yet to date, which is require any testing or disclosure for wastewater treatment plants on the whole throughout the Commonwealth. So this proposal narrowly would require all wastewater treatment plants to monthly test their sludge, that's the residual solid waste of the wastewater treatment process, for PFAS and report that. A couple of really important things to know about this bill, which are favorable from our view. One is that this bill is sophisticated from a regulatory policy perspective because it puts these requirements directly into the four corners of the water pollution permits that these wastewater treatment plants already hold, right? They're Clean Water Act discharge permits. So really straightforward enforcement, kind of a known quantity in terms of the type of testing and reporting that would be required for PFAS that these plants have been doing for other contaminants for years, if not decades. And then also it's not specific to or exclusive to any particular disposal methodology. So if you follow us closely at all, or maybe not that closely, you know that we've been really focused on biosolids. Biosolids are a term of art, a marketing term in some regard for sludge from wastewater treatment plants that has been refined to control several toxic metals and pathogens so that that material can then be separately permitted for land disposal on farmlands, maybe even marketed as a retail gardening product, and so forth. In Virginia, however, the majority of sludge that's produced by wastewater treatment plants doesn't actually end up on farmlands or in your local garden center. Much of it is already disposed through incineration and landfills. And that also has environmental consequences that we're concerned with, including consequences that impact water quality. And so this one's a sort of a generalist, which I think is pretty favorable in the sense that it will allow environmental regulators to know how much PFAS is in any sludge that's being disposed of in any type of method. It's also really important proposed reform because it will give information both to state regulators, but also to operators of wastewater treatment plants about how much PFAS is contaminating their process, right? And so as efforts hopefully continue and progress in the Commonwealth to ratchet down the amount of PFAS contamination we have, the sources, if you will, this will really be a good indicator for tracking that over time. The next bill is a bill introduced by Senator Richard Stewart, again, representative from Tidewater District, the Northern Neck and Middle Peninsula. His bill directly concerns land application of biosolids and proposes to ban the application of biosolids that contain any trace of PFAS. So this doesn't go as far as the full prohibition that's been in place in states like Maine for a number of years, but it is a high bar certainly for industry to reach, and this would be enforceable through land applicators, the entity in Virginia that's actually permitted to land apply biosolids. It's not wastewater treatment plants, it's a third party. It will require them to provide a certification to farmers before they land apply that the material contains no trace of PFAS. So kind of a huge departure from where we are today with this issue and policy in Virginia, where as of today, again, if you follow us at all, you might be aware that Virginia regulators do not even require disclosure of known PFAS contamination of biosolids for land application. And then the third sludge or biosolids bill we have at play now is HB 1443, patroned by Delegate Alfonso Lopez. And this is a sort of a slate of different proposals to begin addressing, again, this risk that PFAS in land applied biosolids poses to Virginians and to their environment. So it would require quarterly testing, but only quarterly testing at wastewater treatment plants. It would impose numeric limits on certain PFAS chemicals in biosolids. And then it would also stand up a work group for the next couple years to take on developing recommendations for a whole host of different issues related to this practice. there are things that, from our view, need to be improved in this bill, certainly to even make it sort of practical for its intended purpose. But the one thing that we've seen in this legislation that we like a lot is farmer disclosure. Again, if you've been following us, the one thing that we've kind of been out front with in our advocacy on this issue in Virginia is that farmers have a right to know. They have a right to know how much PFAS is in the biosolids they're putting on their farms. This bill does go about doing that in a way, though of course could be improved, but it does require land applicators to provide data about PFAS in sludge at least 2 weeks ahead of applications and provide that data directly to farmers. So that's a really positive component of this bill that we're eager to see Virginia adopt, whether through legislation or some other regulatory policy. Moving along, back again for, I think, a third time, really important bill, HB 348, slightly different from past years. This is being patroned by Delegate McLaughlin, formerly Delegate Campbell, same person, she had a name change. She represents a rural district, I believe, in Rockbridge County. So, but this bill would stand up a state fund and a program to resource, especially low-income rural households, with the resources they need to not just test their wells for PFAS, but also to adopt remediation technologies in their home to protect them and their households. This is a really important and necessary complement to the progress we've seen, driven by EPA in the last couple of years through adoption of a national PFAS drinking water rule. But that drinking water rule only protects people who rely upon municipal drinking water. It doesn't protect people. It's not enforceable for private drinking water wells. So a really important reform. Again, now back for a third time. It enjoys wide bipartisan support through the State Water Commission, and we're hopeful that the third time is a charm. Then we have a pair of bills, complementary bills in the Senate and House, patroned by Senator McPike and Delegate Clark. This actually, to circle back to the wastewater sector, this addresses those sources of PFAS contamination to the wastewater treatment process, and in particular, industrial users. So think of anything from a tannery or a metal plating facility or even a landfill that has their wastewater, maybe partially treated, discharged to a public treatment works of some kind. This would require those users to report how much PFAS is in their discharges to the operator of the wastewater treatment plant as well as the state. Really important information to begin making progress to ratcheting down one of the largest sources of PFAS contamination, not just to the wastewater sector, but extending from there to our environment as well. And then, as I mentioned at the top, and then I'll pause, a smattering of different bills that, at least for our part, we weren't expecting, but are absolutely welcome. There were, I think, 2, possibly 3 pieces of legislation introduced at the beginning of session to ban PFAS in certain products, cosmetic products, feminine hygienic products. Really important, especially as a complement as well to addressing those industrial users, not just for the PFAS in these products that we or others in our lives are being directly exposed to through their use, but again, because so much ends up in the wastewater sector, including from our households, an important policy or tool to begin reducing PFAS there as well. A compost bill that doesn't have anything to do with PFAS, but smartly and importantly includes a provision to investigate PFAS contamination of compost products. And then lastly, one bill that would, for a specific airport in Richmond, begin phasing out the use of aqueous film-forming foam, or AFFF, which is a firefighting foam that has really high levels of PFAS in it. So addressing a significant source of PFAS at one airport in particular. So with that, I'll pause. There's a lot to roll out to you all. And I think we've got one question here, and it reads, assuming a PFAS and biosolids application ban, what happens to these biosolids? How can we be sure wastewater treatment plants are responsibly disposing of them? Great question. So that is, of course, to be expected, a really complicated question. So as of today, again, as I mentioned before, a lot of biosolids or sludge, if you will, in Virginia is already being disposed of through other methods, other regulated methods. So putting it into landfills, incinerating it. But as I mentioned, that also has environmental consequences. Most conventional incineration doesn't destroy the PFAS, so it is emitted into the atmosphere and later deposits on water, on land, and so forth. And then landfills as well produce, at the very least, what's called leachate. And that often tends to have concentrated PFAS in it as well. It goes back to wastewater treatment plants, and there's sort of a loophole or a vicious cycle there of sorts. So I think that's really kind of one of the big questions for Virginia policymakers and regulators in the wastewater treatment sector, which is what is the most responsible way from an environmental perspective, from a human health perspective of managing sludge. And I think it necessarily involves looking at how PFAS contaminate and pose risks to people and the environment through these several different disposal methods, right? So the short answer is it's going to take a lot of work. I think the upshot, though, is that, as we pay, especially as regulators pay greater and greater attention to this issue, it should drive technological advancements. That's kind of the whole story of, environmental regulation is as we impose limits, it does drive technological advances. So that could be something as simplistic, so to speak, as, drying sludge, doing other things to sludge to maximize the amount of landfill space capacity we have for disposing of it in landfills, as opposed to in a more uncontrolled way on farmlands, through to hopefully soon enough, for all of our sakes, technologies not only to remove PFAS, but to also destroy it within the wastewater treatment process. There's some positive advancements there in terms of research and development, but to our knowledge, nothing at scale, and certainly nothing at scale that's been adopted within our region. Does Virginia have any ability to legislate requirements for military installations? That's a great question. I don't have an authoritative answer for that. I will say, however, because this is part of our legal program work, Virginia environmental regulators do have the authority to constrain how much PFAS military installations are allowed to discharge through their pollution permits. And we've done that in our own permit advocacy, including presently a lawsuit we filed to challenge one of DEQ's permits for an installation in Virginia, the Fort Belvoir installation, that failed to address PFAS at all in that stormwater discharge permit. Let's see here. I am going to answer one more question. Actually, no, I'm going to pass it along because we've got other folks here waiting in line. I'll do some written responses to questions on Virginia legislative policy and prospects there. And then with that, I think I'm going to pass first to Dean to talk about the DC sewer overflow. Thank you.
Hey everybody, Dean Naujoks, Potomac Riverkeeper. I hope you all can hear me and see me well enough. Great job,
Yes.
David. And I'm just so proud of the organization, Potomac Riverkeeper Network, that we are, leading the charge on PFAS and biosolids and sewage sludge, and also dealing with issues like this. So I'm sure many of you are probably aware that, there was a extremely large sewage spill that started last Monday. And while it's been largely contained, there's still raw sewage that's discharged into the river. We estimate upwards of 300 million gallons of sewage has gone into the river. And we're out here today doing testing with University of Maryland. And we'll have those results next week. I guess we have another webinar coming up I think February 11th to talk more about this very specific issue if people want to learn more about it. But this has just been part of our response to as the Potomac Riverkeeper to eliminate sources of pollution and be a watchdog for the river, and that's what we're doing out here. And I've been obviously DC Water has had their their plates full trying to divert all this sewage into the C&O Canal. Most of it has been diverted into the canal, but there still is raw sewage that's going into the river. I've been really kind of disheartened though by some of the response from particularly the public health agencies. We learned last night that the state of Maryland actually issued a shellfish consumption advisory about 60, 70 miles downriver below the Harry Nice Bridge, the 301 bridge, as a precautionary measure. And yet we have 300 million gallons of sewage moving into DC waters. This just happened 4 or 5 miles upstream from DC waters, and DC still has not issued any type of public health advisory. We know that EPA has not done any testing. Neither has DC DOE. Neither has DC Department of Public Health. We just ran into Montgomery public health officials out here at the site. They're telling me that they're not allowed to sample the river on National Park Service property, off of National Park Service property. They acknowledged that there was a breakdown with this jurisdiction between Maryland and DC and all these various agencies. And so I'm a little frustrated that, if this were to happen in the summer, the entire river would be closed from American Legion Bridge down to National Harbor at the very least. And there'd be public health advisories, but none of that is applied here because we're in this winter storm. And so, we have a team out here from University of Maryland doing some sampling with our team. We're literally having to chop through the ice today in some locations. Obviously, where the sewage has been discharged, that's all still open and able to grab samples. But everywhere else, there's a lot of ice on the river. But we're going to be sampling all the way down to National Harbor because no other agency is doing it. Nobody out there from any public health department is trying to, just at least issue an advisory. And I think a big part of my frustration is DC Water, who's responsible for the sewage spill, is leading the entire response. They are coordinating all the teams, all the public health departments. I find it very odd that the entity that created the sewage spill is leading the entire response, including messaging about public health and information that goes out, and why the public health departments in DC particularly have not done anything to notify the public is a real concern. So there's more to come on this issue. Happy to take a few questions, but we wanted to talk more about our legislative agenda on this Water Wednesday. But that's pretty much what I got for now and today.
Dean, there are a couple questions in here for you. I'm going to throw them your way just because I know you're calling in from the field and probably can't see them.
Yeah, I can't see them.
Right. Do you know where the leading edge of the sewage is right now?
No, I don't think anybody does. Our testing that we did last week, we went down to Fletcher's Cove, and we found pretty high, levels of E. coli, again, which is just an indicator of other bacteria or, and particularly other pathogens and things that could be in the water. But that was pretty high. That was DC Water down at Fletcher's Cove. But we're going to be sampling farther downriver all the way to National Harbor today. We'll see what those results we're happy to share. We're going to share that with the public when it's available. I just wish other agencies were out here doing some of this sampling work and, maybe issuing an advisory to let people know that it's not safe for direct human contact to go near the river.
Okay, thanks. Here's another one. Won't the sludge in the canal just leach back into the river? Why can't they all work together and forget politics? I don't expect you to be able to answer that one right now. And how is the EPA getting involved?
Well, I mean, DC Water says that they are in coordination with EPA and many other agencies, and I believe they are. But they are diverting that sewage in the canal. Just so you know, it's not just sitting in the canal. There is an actual diversion once it's in the canal that goes into the interceptor pipe. So they've diverted it into the canal, it's going down, and then diverting it back into the interceptor pipe while they're working up uh, to repair the broken interceptor pipe. So it is being diverted back in. Now they're going to have to do some type of remediation and cleanup of the C&O Canal at some point in time, but right now that sewage is being diverted back into the interceptor pipe, not just sitting in the canal.
Dean, based on the sampling you've done today, can you identify some of the biggest concerns that you're now looking into with University of Maryland scientists for public health?
Well, obviously some of the pathogens that are likely, and basically everything that you find in raw sewage is in the river, right? And we're talking parasites, pathogens, and all sorts of bacterium, right? So, um, things like MRSA could certainly be in this sewage discharge, and that's some of the things that we're sampling with the University of Maryland. We only sampled for E. coli last Friday, but they have the capability of sampling a lot more, and it's being done in a very inexpensive way. For us to pay for this alone would be probably thousands of dollars for us to do this type of sampling. So I'm really grateful for the University of Maryland to step up and these students and the professors to help us, because they have the same concerns that we have about the potential public health risk. And then there's the other factor of all this stuff being trapped in ice and snow. Is there going to be a delayed release sometime down the road? I don't think anybody has a good understanding of that, particularly with, upwards of 300 million gallons of sewage. I just don't think there's a lot of precedent for this. And that's why we are doing this. None of the other agencies are doing it.
Okay, I'm gonna throw in one. We're getting a lot in, but we might be able to answer some of them by typing. A couple questions around what can people do to help, and also where can they find the most up-to-date information?
Well, we've been posting a lot on Potomac Riverkeeper Network and Potomac Riverkeeper Facebook pages. We're putting stuff on our website as fast as we can. Obviously DC Water has information. But again, what people can do, I just think contacting, if you live in Maryland, for example, they basically said their hands are tied, right? That they can't issue a public health advisory. Now, on Friday, we were told DC Water was telling reporters that this is Maryland's problem. And I'm grateful that way downriver, Maryland said, hey, we're just just to be cautious, issue a shellfish consumption advisory. But that doesn't address the contamination from the sewage upriver that DC, I think, really is on the hook for. But certainly the state of Maryland or Montgomery County could be doing. So if you live in Montgomery County, I think it's really going to take pressure on like the county executive or somebody from the county to say, you know what, we are going to issue an advisory. They're putting out messages via DC Water, but DC Water, the only signs down there from DC Water, they are not a public health agency. We actually caught them yesterday trying to remove those signs because they kind of want this problem to go away. But again, we're going to be monitoring every day to make, until that sewage is stopped going in the river. I just think there's going to be a level of discomfort for a lot of communities downriver, and there should be. And those are the questions I'm being asked, and I'm trying to respond to those. Potomac Riverkeeper Network is trying to respond to that to the best that we can, but we could certainly use some help from some of these public health agencies.
That's great, Dean. I am throwing some of the information you referred to from our website and Facebook, how to find you, in the chat for everyone. And I would be a bad president of the organization if I didn't say another thing to do is help with donations. We are footing the bill for all of this. Dean and Evan, our team, has been out there every single day, including the weekend, watching this, monitoring it, sampling it. We are the ones who are doing this work, and we're paying for it out of our own funding. And I could not be more proud of Dean, Evan, and the entire team for being this responsive to this huge, huge crisis, spill, and public health threat.
Thank you, Betsy. I hope you feel better. And great job,
Thank you.
David. David did a great.
All
David
right.
had the hard job today, talking about all his bills. So great job, and thanks everybody for all the support. I'm gonna jump off here and get out in the field, but thank you for your interest in this issue, and stay tuned.
And Dean's going to join us for a full hour on February 11th. We'll drop the information here, or you can check our website to sign up for that. And so we're going to have more data and information there, as well as additional public health analysis. So we can get that all out to you as quickly as possible. All right. David, do you want me to jump into a little bit of the Maryland legislation?
Yep, please do. I'm doing some written responses here on the fly.
Yeah, I figured.
Thank you.
I saw the typing going on in the background here. Perfect. Ashley, can you throw up my slides? Thank you. And I assume, yes, this is why you're doing it instead of me, is you'll figure out how to get that to look right. Okay, so we have a lot going on in Maryland as well, with PFAS being a big priority area for us. We have been working with some amazing legislative leaders on PFAS in Maryland for, gosh, at least 8 years, and have seen a lot of progress, from banning the non-essential uses of PFAS in certain products under the George Walter Taylor Act to from a regulatory perspective, not legislative, but requiring wastewater treatment plants to monitor for PFAS and disclose that to Maryland Department of the Environment, to essentially a pre-treatment bill that looks at what are the industrial dischargers into a wastewater treatment plant system that are leading the sort of high levels of PFAS we've seen in various places, and trying to make a plan to eliminate those. Last year, we worked with Senator Sarah Love and Delegate Dana Stein on mitigating PFAS in biosolids. That unfortunately did not pass, but led to a lot of really substantive conversations with other interested parties, wastewater treatment plants from all over the state of Maryland, even some national organizations, coordination with impacted parties like farmers and landowners, as well as watermen, to try and figure out what we can do. Where's the research, the information, the technology pointing us to help reduce the risk to communities? And just a tiny background, David already touched on this, so I'll keep it really quick, but this is the issue with the sewage sludge or biosolids, is all of those products that are going into the wastewater treatment plant, actually, like we're seeing all dumped out untreated into the Potomac River right now. But those products, those discharges, have PFAS in them, and that's why they come out the other side on the solids, the sewage sludge that's being applied to farm fields. We've seen disastrous consequences of this in states like Maine and Texas, that both have had harm to farmers, to their animals like cows, and resulting in cancer, loss of use of their fields. We don't want that. Can we, we're hoping we can get ahead of that here, reduce the risk. The steps that Maryland's already put in place are reducing PFAS levels already. But to help ensure that sewage sludge can be used in the form of biosolids as fertilizer, we need to ensure that we don't have super high risk factors of PFAS contamination. So Senator Love and Delegate Stein, the bill that they have submitted and are proposing, it doesn't have a number yet, but it'll get there, would do a few different things. One is actually set a limit, that if a combined limit of 25 parts per billion of PFOS and PFOA, the two most common Um, if you have that, you can't just land apply anymore. 25. Between 25 and 50, if you're coming in that level with those combined, you have to make a mitigation plan working with Maryland Department of the Environment to try and address those source PFAS. Where are they coming from? Is it industrial dischargers? Is it leachate from landfills? Whatever it is, and try and reduce those levels down. And during that time that you're working on the mitigation plan, there are going to be some temporary restrictions on how much can be land applied, as well as some things like additional setbacks from, for example, drinking water wells and drinking water intakes. If you are above combined 50 parts per billion, I'm sorry, I see it says 50 parts per trillion in here, and it should be billion. I will fix that. That you can't land apply at all. So the data right here shows the current wastewater treatment plants in Maryland, and that the vast majority of them can meet this with their current actions they've been taking to reduce PFAS. There are a couple that are going to have to work on the mitigation plan with MDE and see if they can reduce those sources. We should have a final bill out with a bill number within about a week and a half, and we will be posting regularly on that on our website and helping to get all of you involved, get your voices there, and letting the legislators know that you support this. Next one. So our next is related, which is how to get the PFAS from consumer products out. So by phasing out those uses, we are also, as a result, phasing out that stream of PFAS that's getting into wastewater treatment plants and resulting in the outgoing sewage sludge. So it's kind of doubly reducing the harm to us, the consumers, by getting it out of the direct consumer products, but then also preventing it from getting through the wastewater treatment plants, discharging back into our surface waters or being land applied as biosolids. And the focus area here is not on every product where it's out there, but some of the ones that are most prevalent and have easy ways that they don't need to be in there. They don't need to be in these products. So there are other ways to do this. So hygiene products that are going on us, makeup, lipstick, dental floss, feminine care products, family planning products, nonstick coatings. Yeah, dental floss is one of the most frustrating ones to me. You're putting that right into your teeth. So this would make a really big move forward. But I also want to flag that this is one of the biggest things that the Maryland wastewater treatment plants asked for the legislators and advocates help with. So we are expecting them to strongly support this bill since it's there by their request. We haven't seen that yet. Hope it's coming around the corner from them. We are expecting some pushback from a few of the wastewater treatment plants that aren't under that 25 number. But again, they have the opportunity to work on a mitigation plan. It's not like there's a ban on using biosolid or sewage sludge. They can still continue to use it, just work on reducing those PFAS sources. And if they help us phase out these products, it's going to reduce the PFAS overall in their system and help end those issues. I don't think I said this at the beginning, but this is led by Senator Sarah Love and Delegate Sheila Ruth. And again, both of them have been working on trying to reduce Marylanders' exposure to PFAS, as it is so incredibly toxic to us in really, really small amounts. These are not our only bills that we're supporting. We're working on a bunch of other things, from data transparency on water impacts of data center development to coal ash bill that helps further the win we had earlier this year, or sorry, early last year, and would help incentivize the encapsulated beneficial reuse of coal ash and really put a push for removing it from the landfills where it's currently sitting and leaching into groundwater. So I'm going to stop there, and David can take some questions, and we can also discuss.
Thank you, Betsy. I'm not seeing any questions about Maryland legislation at this time. So unless folks want to get in some extra questions at the wire here, I have nothing more to add on the legislative front. Betsy, I'm not sure if you have anything else that you want to flag for folks. So we still have a bit of a captive audience here for 10 minutes, or Mark, if you want to as well. Not seeing any questions here. I will say, actually, I'll respond to one live. There was a couple questions about what can we do. Well, can I help volunteer with sampling? And maybe this might be the most satisfactory response, but in short, the best thing to do is get in touch with us, get involved, obviously. And so if you're concerned about whether that's sewage pollution or agricultural pollution, or maybe just protecting an aquatic creature that's important to you in your part of the watershed, the best way to get involved, to make a difference, is to figure out who your riverkeeper is and to get in touch with them and their team. And so I responded to one question that was about, the threat of sewage overflows in the upper Potomac. Had kind of a long written answer there. I hope folks can take a peek at that. But the short of it is Brent Walls, our upper Potomac Riverkeeper. He's out there on a day-to-day basis doing the work to investigate pollution, to work with our members and other folks in the community to engage in the process of holding government accountable to controlling these sources of pollution, and then identifying when polluters are violating the law, right? Or otherwise discharging pollution in a way that's harming our rivers and our environment. So be in touch with your riverkeeper, find out who they are. You can find their contact information pretty readily on our website. And there was another specific question about how can we as volunteers or member of the public get involved in sampling. And there, again, I think the best way to get involved is to be in contact directly with folks on our team. I'll shout out Evan Quinter in particular, our water quality and volunteer coordinator for our Potomac Riverkeeper program. Evan is fabulous. He's been out every single day the past, last week or so with Dean to respond to this sewage overflow in DC. And he also works and trains volunteers with other leaders on our team on a day-to-day and week-to-week basis to learn how to do water sampling, to work in their own communities to identify pollution and report it to us. And you can reach Evan. I will drop his email address here in the chat, but you can also find his contact information on our webpage. You can reach Evan by email, and he will be in touch when he comes back from the field, or maybe on his phone, to get you plugged into those opportunities as well. So I'll take one last peek here.
There is a Maryland PFAS question I can answer.
Please.
And I can actually tell you this is good news. The sponsor withdrew the bill, which was Delegate Sheila Ruth, so that they did not, so that the industry push to make a very narrow definition of PFAS did not get through. So that kind of happened at the last minute out of an abundance of frustration for the effort to co-opt that. And I just wanted to flag one other thing that we're all watching is the budgets in Maryland and Virginia, the funding going to the environmental agencies, Maryland Department of the Environment, Virginia Department of Environmental Quality, but even more so the natural resource side of Maryland Department of Natural Resources and Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources are getting walloped. And with the lack of federal partners and federal funding, data collection, information, protection of things like riparian buffers, as was noted in there, are all in really sad shape if we're not able to get some additional funding back into those budgets in both states.
Thank you, Betsy. I have one question on, if I may, field about the sewer overflow and these particularly droughty conditions we've been having, especially through the winter. And is that making it worse? Is I think sort of the gist of the question. And the answer is, from our perspective and to our understanding, that's that's actually the case in a couple of respects. I think as folks have noted, the sewage collection system in the DC metro area is what's called a combined sewer system, which means that those pipes convey not just wastewater, but oftentimes stormwater. And so when there's very little precipitation, there's little or no stormwater in those pipes, and it's just that wastewater discharge. And so the first part of the question is to answer is yes. Yeah, the overflow is not influenced by wet weather or stormwater. So the flow coming out of the pipe had been or continues to be, at lower flows, more concentrated, just wastewater. And when we talk about wastewater, we're talking about not just what comes out of our households, which is cause for concern enough, but also, again, industrial users and commercial users of sewer collection systems who are discharging not just what gets flushed down the toilet, but also, maybe partially treated or even untreated industrial wastewater streams as well. And then because the river levels are so low due to the droughty conditions, that means proportionally there's the sewage is having a greater influence on water quality in the river because there's less sort of just regular river flow to dilute perhaps the impacts of those water quality contaminants as well. So I hope you answered your question. And I think with that, we will wrap up. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us for this Water Wednesday. I hope you found it to be valuable. We certainly really appreciate your attention and willingness to join us here midday, midweek. Maybe most of us were maybe snowed in, and I hope maybe this was a little bit entertaining and certainly very interesting for you. And look out again, not just for opportunities to volunteer with us, but Water Wednesday events in future months this year. We'll be continuing to come back to you all to update you on the outcomes of state legislative policymaking in Virginia and Maryland, and to continue talking to you about pollution threats to the Potomac and the work that we're doing in response. So thanks again, and hope to see you next month.